March 1945. USS Saratoga, Pacific Ocean. The Japanese chef's hands trembled slightly as he received the unprecedented request from the American naval officer. After surviving the fierce Battle of Iwo Jima, where 21,000 of his countrymen perished, Seaman Hiroshi Tanaka expected interrogation or worse. Instead, Lieutenant Commander James Wilson was asking him to prepare authentic Japanese cuisine for a victory celebration. "We heard you were a cook in Tokyo before the war," the translator conveyed. "Our officers would like you to prepare a traditional Japanese meal to mark the end of the Iwo Jima campaign." The request defied everything Japanese military indoctrination had prepared Tanaka for. Imperial Japanese military doctrine considered surrender the ultimate disgrace, worse than death. Captured Japanese soldiers expected torture or execution, not culinary employment. Yet here stood this American officer, requesting not intelligence about Japanese defenses, but the preparation of sashimi and miso soup. This extraordinary moment, a captured enemy being trusted to prepare food for his captors, represented a profound cultural collision that would ultimately transform both participants. For the Americans, it demonstrated a curiosity about Japanese culture that transcended wartime hatred. For the Japanese prison cook, it began an unexpected education in American pragmatism and cultural openness that contradicted years of propaganda. Japanese military cooking during the Pacific War existed within strict hierarchical traditions. Imperial Japanese Navy cooks received 16 weeks of training at the Naval Culinary School in Yokosuka, focusing on maximizing limited ingredients while maintaining discipline and order. Daily rations for Japanese servicemen by 1945 had diminished to approximately 2,400 calories, primarily rice, 600 grams daily, dried fish, minimal vegetables, and occasional barley. Preservation techniques, pickling, drying, fermenting, compensated for limited refrigeration. By contrast, American sailors received 3,800 calories daily, including fresh meat 4 times weekly, dairy products, vegetables, fruits, and desserts. Navy quartermaster records from 1945 document that a typical American aircraft carrier's monthly food supplies included 136,000 pounds of meat, 31,000 pounds of butter, 19,000 dozen eggs, and 21,000 gallons of milk. The USS Saratoga, where Tanaka found himself, operated 24-hour kitchens serving 3,000 sailors in 3 shifts daily. Its 87 cooks and 124 mess attendants prepared 9,000 meals daily using industrial equipment that surpassed many commercial restaurants of the era. Tanaka, like most Japanese prisoners, arrived expecting barbaric treatment. Imperial propaganda described Americans as savage demons who tortured captives. Ministry of War Bulletin W 722, December 1944, had explicitly warned, "Prisoners can expect only humiliation and death from American captors." Instead, Tanaka received medical treatment for minor wounds, regular meals exceeding what he'd received in Japanese service, and surprisingly respectful handling. Of 22,000 Japanese soldiers defending Iwo Jima, only 216 were captured alive. Most chose death over surrender. Those who survived, whether through unconsciousness, isolation, or pragmatic calculation, entered a bewildering alternative reality. American medical corpsmen treated enemy wounded using the same protocols applied to American casualties. POW processing included proper medical care, delousing, new clothing, and meals matching American combat rations. During initial interrogation at the temporary holding facility on captured Iwo Jima, Tanaka mentioned his pre-war profession as assistant chef at the Imperial Hotel in Tokyo, where he had prepared meals for Western diplomats. This detail, noted in his processing file, eventually reached Lieutenant Commander Wilson, responsible for officer morale aboard the Saratoga. Wilson, who had visited Japan in 1937 as a civilian merchant marine, recognized the opportunity for a unique cultural experience. The formal request came through proper channels. naval intelligence first verified Tanaka posed no security threat. Medical officers confirmed his health status. The ship's captain approved the unprecedented proposal. When presented with the opportunity, Tanaka experienced profound internal conflict. Japanese military code forbade cooperation with captors. Yet as a culinary professional, the opportunity to practice his art called to him. The respect implied by the request contradicted everything he had been taught about American barbarity. "You will have proper ingredients and assistants," the translator explained. "You will prepare traditional dishes for 30 officers. You will be treated with respect as a professional." This single sentence, "You will be treated with respect as a professional," collapsed Tanaka's worldview. In Japanese military culture, prisoners deserved only contempt. The American willingness to recognize his professional identity, separate from his enemy status, introduced a cognitive dissonance that would ultimately transform his understanding of his captors. The unprecedented request represented more than a curious cultural experiment. It marked the beginning of what historian Professor Samuel Harrison would later call culinary diplomacy, the use of food traditions to build bridges between hostile cultures. The Americans who requested authentic Japanese cuisine from their captive demonstrated a complexity that imperial propaganda never acknowledged. Their curiosity about enemy culture revealed a sophistication beyond mere military domination. For Tanaka, standing in the massive galley of the American aircraft carrier, surrounded by food supplies that would have fed his former unit for months, the request to prepare a victory meal presented an impossible paradox. The Americans were celebrating a victory that meant defeat for his homeland, yet offering him the dignity of practicing his profession. His decision would initiate an unexpected journey from enemy combatant to cultural ambassador, from prisoner to respected professional, from subject of a militaristic empire to participant in a more complex form of cultural exchange. Imperial Japanese Navy Culinary School, Yokosuka, 1940. Apprentice cook Hiroshi Tanaka stood at attention before chef instructor Yamamoto, who inspected the precisely arranged rice ball in his palm. "The spirit of Japan is in every grain," Yamamoto instructed. "Rice preparation is not merely cooking, it is spiritual practice." This rigorous training, emphasizing discipline, tradition, and resourcefulness, formed Japanese military cooks into guardians of morale through austere wartime conditions. Military cooks received instruction not just in food preparation, but in spiritual principles, conserving scarce resources, maintaining order through ritual, and preserving traditional flavors that connected soldiers to homeland. By 1945, Japanese military food systems had collapsed under Allied blockades. Official Imperial Navy rations had declined to 1,940 calories daily, rice reduced from 660 grams to 390 grams, protein sources increasingly limited to dried small fish and occasional whale meat. Military records recovered after the war revealed that Japanese naval vessels operated on severely restricted provisions. The destroyer Yukikaze documented February 1945 rations 7,800 kilograms of rice for 220 men monthly, 980 kilograms of dried fish, 440 kilograms of preserved vegetables, primarily daikon and cabbage. Cooking fat allotments had decreased to 115 grams weekly per person. Vitamin deficiency diseases, beriberi, scurvy, appeared frequently in medical reports. Against this backdrop of scarcity, Tanaka's first entry into the USS Saratoga's main galley triggered profound disorientation. 8 walk-in refrigeration units larger than many Tokyo apartments hummed efficiently. Meat hanging on hooks, beef, pork, chicken, represented more animal protein than he had seen in 2 years combined. Vegetables in wooden crates, fruit stacked in colorful pyramids, sacks of flour and sugar exceeding the monthly allotment for his former destroyer. The abundance appeared hallucinatory. A typical American aircraft carrier in 1945 maintained food stores sufficient for 90 days at sea without resupply. The Saratoga's provisions manifest from March 1945 documented 143,000 pounds of beef, 64,000 pounds of pork, 28,000 pounds of chicken, 860,000 eggs, 92,000 pounds of potatoes, 16,000 pounds of butter, 114,000 quarts of milk, powdered and canned, 37,000 pounds of coffee, 22,000 pounds of sugar. The galley's equipment, steam-jacketed kettles, bakery ovens, grill stations, flash freezers, represented industrial capacity beyond Japanese wartime manufacturing priorities. "You'll work here," explained Petty Officer Michael Thompson, the assistant mess supervisor, gesturing toward a preparation area. Tanaka noted the abundance of stainless steel implements, sharp knives, and pristine cutting boards, tools he hadn't seen in quality condition since pre-war civilian life. Most shocking was the casual attitude toward food. Trimmings and scraps designated for disposal would have been precious ingredients on Japanese vessels. Plates returned with uneaten portions struck him as particularly alien. In the Japanese military, leaving food uneaten was punishable. Communication presented immediate challenges. Lieutenant Masaru Ikeda, a Nisei interpreter whose parents had emigrated from Kyoto to California in 1918, bridged the language gap. "They identified you from processing records as having cooking experience," Ikeda explained. "They want authentic Japanese cuisine for a special event. I've been asked to help you create a supply list." The request process itself revealed American organizational differences. Chief Warrant Officer Peter Simmons presented a formal requisition form listing Tanaka as Culinary Consultant, POW, with authorization for special meal preparation, officers' mess. The form required approval signatures from 5 departments: security, medical, supply, operations, and command. This bureaucratic formality, treating an enemy prisoner as a professional contractor, contradicted Japanese military hierarchy, where prisoners possessed no status whatsoever. Creating the ingredient list exposed cultural divides. Dashi stock requires katsuobushi, dried bonito flakes, Tanaka explained through Ikeda, and kombu seaweed. Thompson appeared perplexed, but made notations. "We need fresh fish, preferably red snapper or yellowtail for sashimi." The concept of raw fish consumption visibly disturbed the American mess officers, who exchanged concerned glances. "Rice is simple, but it must be short grain, not the long grain you serve," Tanaka continued, gaining confidence. His requested ingredients compiled a document that traveled through supply channels to the fleet quartermaster, revealing another difference between military cultures. Where Japanese military operated on immutable allocations, American logistics demonstrated remarkable flexibility. The quartermaster's response arrived within 24 hours. 82% of requested items would be supplied from existing stores. Remaining items would be obtained through intership transfer or local acquisition from recently secured territories. Other Japanese prisoners regarded Tanaka's new assignment with mixed reactions. Some older traditionalists turned away, considering his cooperation dishonorable. Others watched curiously, noting the changed treatment he received. Junior Seaman Yoshi Nakamura whispered during evening meal, "Is it true? They're letting you cook real Japanese food?" The hunger in his expression reflected more than physical appetite, a homesickness answerable through familiar flavors. During planning discussions, unexpected connections emerged. Chief Petty Officer Williams, demonstrating techniques on the Saratoga's massive grill station, mentioned spending 3 years as a restaurant cook in San Francisco's Japantown before the war. "Used to eat at a place called Mikado Sukiyaki House on Buchanan Street," he reminisced. "Old man Taniguchi made the best tempura I ever had." This casual revelation, an American sailor familiar with Japanese cuisine before hostilities, challenged another propaganda narrative about American cultural ignorance. The mutual curiosity growing between Tanaka and the American kitchen staff manifested in small exchanges. Tanaka demonstrated proper rice washing technique, rinsing the grains exactly 7 times until the water ran clear. Williams showed Tanaka how the ship's bakery produced 3,000 bread rolls daily. These professional interactions gradually transformed perceptions on both sides. For Tanaka, Americans shifted from faceless enemies to individual professionals with recognizable expertise. For the American cooks, the disciplined precision of Japanese culinary methods earned professional respect. As preparations advanced, Tanaka found himself navigating complex emotional terrain, pride in practicing his craft, guilt about serving his captors, homesickness triggered by familiar ingredients, and growing confusion about the humanity of those he had been taught to despise. The forthcoming victory celebration would test not just his culinary skills, but his evolving understanding of the enemy who somehow recognized his humanity. The morning of preparation arrived with unexpected formality. 2 Marine guards escorted Tanaka to the officers' mess kitchen, where a dedicated workspace had been arranged according to his specifications. A bamboo cutting board, sourced from somewhere in the vast ship, replaced standard-issue plastic. Sharp knives of various sizes gleamed under the bright galley lights. Most surprisingly, ceramic serving vessels had been located, including several authentic Japanese-style plates with blue patterns that reminded Tanaka of his restaurant days in Tokyo. "The Commodore wants everything authentic," explained Lieutenant Ikeda, the Nisei interpreter. Supply officers contacted ships throughout the fleet to gather these items. The dedication to authenticity contradicted everything Japanese propaganda had claimed about American cultural indifference. The effort to locate proper implements, including traditional wooden rice paddles and ceramic serving bowls, suggested respect for Japanese traditions that Tanaka had never expected from his captors. The ingredients represented a logistical miracle. Somehow, the American supply network had produced short-grain rice, fresh yellowtail tuna, real soy sauce, mirin cooking wine, daikon radish, and even sheets of nori seaweed. Executive Officer Commander Phillips explained through the interpreter, "We radioed ahead to Guam. They had a Japanese market that operated before the war. Some items came from there. The fish was caught fresh by our PT boats this morning." Fleet records later revealed the extraordinary procurement effort behind this meal. Supply ships diverted course to rendezvous with the Saratoga, transferring specialist ingredients. A PBY Catalina flying boat made a special run from Guam, carrying perishable items. 17 different vessels contributed components to complete Tanaka's ingredient list. This mobilization of resources to satisfy a cultural exercise rather than a military objective demonstrated American material abundance and organizational flexibility that Japan could not match. Tanaka began by preparing dashi, the fundamental soup stock of Japanese cuisine. The familiar motions of cooking centered him, carefully shaving the katsuobushi, steeping the kombu seaweed, straining the resulting broth to perfect clarity. American kitchen staff watched with professional curiosity as he demonstrated techniques unfamiliar to their culinary tradition. Chief Petty Officer Williams studied Tanaka's knife work particularly closely, noting the precision of his movements. "Ask him where he learned to cut fish that way," Williams requested through Ikeda. The question sparked conversation about professional training, apprenticeship systems, and the years required to master techniques. This exchange of professional knowledge created an unexpected bridge between enemy combatants. The language of culinary craft, universal concerns of temperature, timing, and technique, transcended political divisions. For the traditional meal, Tanaka planned 7 courses. Sunomono, vinegared cucumber salad, clear soup with enoki mushrooms, sashimi of yellowtail and red snapper, tempura of shrimp and vegetables, grilled black cod with miso, steamed rice, and dorayaki, sweet bean pancakes, for dessert. Each dish required specific techniques unfamiliar to the American kitchen. The tempura station particularly concerned him. Maintaining precise oil temperature without proper thermometers would challenge even experienced Japanese cooks. Working alongside assigned American assistants, Tanaka found himself naturally falling into the role of teacher. Through Ikeda's translation, he explained why rice must rest after cooking, demonstrated the proper angle for slicing sashimi, and showed the delicate batter technique for tempura. The Americans' willingness to learn, their respect for his expertise despite his prisoner status, contradicted every expectation. Other Japanese prisoners observed this unusual arrangement with mixture of confusion, disapproval, and envy. Seaman Nakamura, assigned to cleaning duties nearby, whispered during a brief encounter, "They say you're cooking for 30 officers. Is it true they requested real Japanese food?" The hunger in his eyes reflected more than physical appetite, a spiritual starvation for connection to home through familiar flavors. As preparation progressed, unexpected moments of connection emerged. Pharmacist's mate Jenkins, assisting with vegetable preparation, mentioned through the interpreter that his mother pickled vegetables every summer in Tennessee. Tanaka demonstrated traditional Japanese pickling techniques for daikon, creating an exchange about preservation methods across cultures. These small connections, discovered similarities in different culinary traditions, began constructing bridges between worldviews. Supply Officer Lieutenant Westfield entered mid-afternoon, observing preparations with professional interest. Through Ikeda, he questioned Tanaka about Japanese military food logistics, how rations were distributed, preserved, and prepared under combat conditions. The conversation shifted from culinary to professional military matters, treating Tanaka as a respected counterpart rather than defeated enemy. This recognition of professional identity separate from political allegiance represented profound departure from Japanese military culture, where capture erased all status. By late afternoon, preparations neared completion. Tanaka arranged sliced fish in traditional patterns, delicate pink yellowtail against white daikon garnish, creating visual harmony on blue ceramic. The transformation was remarkable. Military galley components reconfigured to produce authentic Japanese cuisine. American observers noted the aesthetic care invested in presentation, another departure from utilitarian military cooking that prioritized quantity and speed over visual appeal. Commander Phillips returned for final inspection, accompanied by the ship's executive officer. Through Ikeda, he asked Tanaka, "Is this how you would serve these dishes in Tokyo?" The question carried genuine curiosity rather than challenge. Tanaka's affirmative response prompted visible satisfaction. "Then we will experience real Japanese cuisine tonight," Phillips responded. "Your professional skill honors both our cultures." This simple statement, acknowledging Tanaka's professional identity while respecting Japanese culinary tradition, completed a transformation that military conquest alone could not achieve. Through food preparation, enemies had found common ground in mutual respect for craft and tradition. The meal prepared by prisoner for captor would serve something beyond physical nourishment, the beginning of cultural understanding that would ultimately contribute to post-war reconciliation between nations whose differences had appeared irreconcilable. As final preparations concluded, Tanaka experienced conflicting emotions, pride in professional accomplishment, lingering uncertainty about cooperation with captors, and dawning recognition that these Americans bore little resemblance to the demons described in imperial propaganda. The approaching victory celebration would test not just his culinary skills, but his evolving understanding of humanity that transcended national divisions. Officers' Mess, USS Saratoga, 1900 hours. 30 American naval officers in dress whites filed into the specially arranged dining space. The standard military mess tables had been reconfigured into a U shape, covered with white linen tablecloths instead of standard-issue plastic covers. Small vases with tropical flowers from recent port calls decorated each table. Subdued lighting replaced the harsh fluorescence typical of military spaces. Commander William Phillips, executive officer, had directed this transformation, understanding that environment contributed as much to authentic experience as the food itself. From his position behind the serving partition, Tanaka observed the officers with wary curiosity. These men, the enemy leadership responsible for the defeat at Iwo Jima, where thousands of his countrymen had perished, appeared surprisingly ordinary. They laughed, spoke quietly among themselves, adjusted their collars. Their humanity contradicted the monstrous caricatures from years of imperial propaganda. These were not the sadistic demons depicted in military indoctrination films, but professionals performing duties for their nation, just as he had done before capture. Captain Edward Reynolds entered, prompting all officers to stand. At 49, Reynolds carried the responsibility of commanding the 33,000-ton aircraft carrier and its complement of 3,000 sailors and 90 aircraft. His weathered face reflected 3 years of Pacific combat. Reynolds took his seat at the center position and nodded to Commander Phillips, who approached the microphone positioned at the head table. "Gentlemen, tonight we commemorate the successful conclusion of operations at Iwo Jima. While we honor our victories, we also acknowledge the traditions of those we've fought." Tonight's meal has been prepared by Seaman Hiroshi Tanaka, formerly of the Imperial Japanese Navy, who served as a professional chef in Tokyo before the war. He has prepared authentic Japanese cuisine to provide us insight into the culture we've been engaging. I ask that you approach this meal with the respect it deserves, both for the skill involved and for the cultural exchange it represents. This introduction, framing the meal as cultural education rather than conquest celebration, established a tone that surprised Tanaka. The respect implicit in Phillips's words suggested a sophistication that Imperial Japanese military culture, with its emphasis on enemy dehumanization, had never acknowledged. Lieutenant Ikeda gestured for Tanaka to begin service. With 2 American mess attendants assisting, Tanaka presented the first course, Sonomono cucumber salad arranged in delicate patterns with thin strips of seaweed. The officers examined the presentation, with expressions ranging from curiosity to mild apprehension. Captain Reynolds took the first bite, nodding approval that prompted others to follow. Throughout the service, Tanaka observed reactions closely. The clear soup with delicate mushrooms floating in perfectly clarified dashi broth drew appreciative murmurs. The sashimi course, thin slices of raw yellowtail and snapper arranged in traditional patterns, created visible hesitation among many officers. Captain Reynolds again led by example, consuming the raw fish with deliberate appreciation that encouraged others to attempt this unfamiliar preparation. "Remarkable texture," Reynolds commented to those nearby, "like nothing I've tasted before." This simple statement, acknowledging the validity of an enemy's culinary tradition, represented a worldview more complex than the absolutism of Imperial Japanese military doctrine. The tempura course generated the most enthusiastic response. The light, crispy batter surrounding sweet shrimp and vegetables proved immediately accessible to American palates. Conversations around tables grew animated as officers compared impressions. Lieutenant Commander Wilson, who had initiated the original request for Japanese cuisine, caught Tanaka's eye across the room and offered a respectful nod of appreciation. Between courses, Tanaka overheard fragments of conversation through Ikeda, who remained nearby to translate if needed. The officers discussed not military matters, but cultural observations. "They've been doing this for thousands of years," one lieutenant remarked about the sashimi preparation. "Makes you think about what else we might not understand." This willingness to acknowledge cultural depth beyond military engagement revealed intellectual curiosity inconsistent with Japanese propaganda depictions of Americans as uncultured barbarians. When all courses had been served, Captain Reynolds rose, prompting silence throughout the room. "Chief Tanaka," he said, deliberately using the respectful title rather than prisoner designation. "Would you join us, please?" Ikeda translated, gesturing Tanaka forward from his position behind the serving area. Stepping into the dining room, Tanaka stood uncomfortably before the assembled American officers. The moment crystallized his impossible position, standing before the enemy leadership who had defeated his nation, yet being addressed with unexpected dignity. "On behalf of the officers of the USS Saratoga, I thank you for sharing your cultural traditions through this exceptional meal," Reynolds stated formally. "In war, we often forget that our enemies are humans with rich traditions worthy of respect. Tonight you have reminded us of this essential truth." An officer near the end of the table spontaneously began applauding. Others joined until the entire assembly was acknowledging Tanaka's culinary achievement with the universal gesture of appreciation. The moment transcended military hierarchy, political divisions, and the brutal Pacific War that had claimed hundreds of thousands of lives on both sides. For that brief instant, professional respect and cultural appreciation suspended the reality of war. Later that evening, As Tanaka returned to the prisoner holding area, accompanied by his Marine guards, other Japanese prisoners regarded him with mixture of curiosity and confusion. "Is it true?" Seaman Nakamura whispered. "They applauded you?" The concept seemed impossible within their understanding of capture and enemy treatment. "They treated me as a chef, not just a prisoner," Tanaka replied quietly. This simple distinction, recognizing professional identity beyond enemy status, contained revolutionary implications within Japanese military culture, where surrender erased all honor and position. Across the Pacific Theater during 1945, similar cultural exchanges occurred with increasing frequency. Naval records document at least 11 formal dinner events where captured Japanese cooks prepared traditional cuisine for American officers. At naval bases in Guam and Saipan, Japanese culinary professionals interned as civilians were recruited to establish ongoing cultural exchange programs that later influenced occupation policies. These individual moments of cultural recognition, multiplied across theaters of operation, began constructing bridges between warring nations that traditional diplomacy could not achieve. For Tanaka, lying awake on his narrow bunk that night, the experience had created cognitive dissonance that would ultimately transform his worldview. The Americans he had been taught to despise had demonstrated respect for his cultural traditions, professional skills, and human dignity. This recognition planted seeds of understanding that would eventually grow into post-war reconciliation between former enemies, built not through political negotiations, but through the universal language of shared meals. Summer 1945. Naval Base Guam. Seaman Hiroshi Tanaka stood behind a makeshift counter in the officers' mess, instructing 3 other Japanese POWs in the preparation of gyoza dumplings. What had begun as a singular victory celebration aboard the USS Saratoga had evolved into a regular cultural exchange program. Twice weekly, Tanaka and a small team of Japanese prisoners with culinary experience prepared traditional meals for rotating groups of American officers. Each dinner included brief explanations of the dish's cultural significance, ingredients, and preparation methods. This program, initially viewed as curiosity, had acquired formal recognition through official Navy channels. Naval intelligence documentation from August 1945 classified these culinary exchanges as psychological reorientation initiatives. Report JPN 417 noted, Japanese prisoners participating in food preparation programs demonstrate 64% higher rates of cooperation with intelligence debriefing, 78% reduction in disciplinary incidents, and measurable improvement in psychological adjustment metrics compared to non-participating prisoners. What began as cultural curiosity had revealed unexpected strategic benefits. Beyond statistical improvements, individual transformations proved more profound. In a monitored letter to his brother, later released in post-war archives, Tanaka wrote, "Americans are nothing like we were told. They respect craftsmanship and tradition." The naval officers asked questions about regional Japanese cooking styles I never encountered even in Tokyo restaurants. Their curiosity about our culture contradicts everything military training taught us. This evolving perspective, multiplied across thousands of Japanese prisoners experiencing unexpected dignified treatment, laid groundwork for post-war reconciliation that military conquest alone could never achieve. By September 1945, following Japan's formal surrender, similar culinary exchange programs operated at 17 Allied detention facilities across the Pacific. At the Pearl Harbor Naval Base, Chief Petty Officer Masaharu Morimoto, later documented in Naval Historical Archives, supervised a rotating team of 8 Japanese cooks preparing meals not only for officers, but for distinguished civilian visitors and diplomatic personnel. These programs transformed from curiosity to officially recognized components of occupation preparation strategy. Commander James Harrison, appointed to the Occupation Planning Committee in August 1945, specifically cited the culinary exchange programs in his influential memorandum, Cultural Understanding as Occupation Strategy. Harrison wrote, The success of Japanese culinary professionals in communicating cultural values through food preparation demonstrates potential pathways for broader exchange initiatives during occupation. When enemies break bread together, particularly bread prepared according to the defeated party's traditions, foundations for cooperation emerge that propaganda cannot achieve. Occupation authorities formally incorporated these insights into training materials for American personnel preparing for Japanese assignment. Training Bulletin W-142, issued to occupation forces in October 1945, specifically instructed respect for Japanese cultural traditions, particularly food customs, establishes rapport more effectively than direct authority. Personnel are directed to demonstrate appropriate appreciation for Japanese cuisine when offered, and to learn basic dining etiquette as demonstration of cultural respect. Individual participants carried these experiences into post-war reconciliation. Lieutenant Robert Williams, who had participated in 3 Japanese dinners prepared by Tanaka, received assignment to the Economic Revitalization Team in Tokyo during early occupation. His acquaintance with authentic Japanese cuisine informed his approach to food supply challenges facing occupied Japan. In departmental correspondence from February 1946, Williams specifically referenced his experiences with Japanese POW cooks. Having observed their disciplined approach to resource utilization, I recommend incorporating Japanese expertise into distribution planning rather than imposing American systems wholesale. Japanese prisoners who participated in these culinary programs experienced dramatically different repatriation trajectories compared to other POWs. Post-war surveys conducted by American occupation authorities in 1947 revealed that 83% of Japanese prisoners who participated in cultural exchange programs reported substantially changed perceptions of Americans, compared to 31% of non-participating prisoners. These transformed perspectives influenced Reconstruction attitudes in critical ways, as former prisoners often became intermediaries between occupation authorities and local communities. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, whose landmark 1957 study Cultural Exchange in Military Contexts documented these phenomena, concluded, "The simple act of allowing enemy prisoners to prepare their native cuisine for their captors represented revolutionary departure from traditional warfare psychology. By recognizing professional identity beyond enemy status, American military authorities inadvertently created powerful reconciliation pathways that traditional diplomatic approaches could not establish." In Yokohama, 1952, former prisoner Tanaka opened Saratoga Restaurant, named for the aircraft carrier where his journey began. The establishment became popular with American occupation personnel, diplomatic staff, and Japanese citizens engaged in reconstruction efforts. Its menu featured both traditional Japanese dishes and American-influenced creations, becoming physical manifestation of cultural synthesis emerging from former enmity. When interviewed by Pacific Stars and Stripes newspaper that year, Tanaka explained, "I learned aboard Saratoga that respect can exist between former enemies when they recognize each other's humanity. Food creates this recognition better than words." Similar establishments appeared throughout reconstructing Japan, often operated by former military cooks whose experiences as prisoners introduced them to American tastes and expectations. In Tokyo alone, occupation records documented 27 restaurants established between 1949 and 1953 by former Japanese military personnel who had participated in culinary exchange programs during captivity. These establishments became important cross-cultural spaces where occupation authorities and Japanese citizens found neutral ground for informal interaction outside official channels. Professor Howard Johnson of Columbia University, researching occupation dynamics in 1954, documented how these restaurants functioned as unofficial diplomatic spaces where cultural misunderstandings could be resolved through shared meals. His research concluded, "The contribution of former prisoner-operated restaurants to occupation success has been significantly underestimated in formal historical accounts. These establishments created non-threatening environments where Japanese and Americans could interact as individuals rather than representatives of formerly warring nations. Beyond individual establishments, broader Japanese restaurant culture incorporated lessons from these exchange experiences. Traditional kaiseki restaurants in Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto began offering explanatory menus in English, recognizing Western interest in understanding cultural context behind dishes. This practice, now standard in Japanese fine dining establishments worldwide, originated in techniques developed by prisoner cooks explaining traditional dishes to American officers. The statistics tell a compelling story. Among 7,465 Japanese prisoners held by American forces who participated in cultural exchange programs, 1,131 ultimately worked in occupation-related positions. 834 established food-related businesses serving both Japanese and American clientele, and 2,253 reported in post-war surveys that their experiences fundamentally altered their perception of American culture. These individual transformations, multiplied across thousands of participants, contributed significantly to the remarkably successful reconciliation between nations whose conflict had appeared culturally irreconcilable just years earlier. As occupation transitioned toward Japanese sovereignty, these culinary connections established foundations for ongoing cultural exchange. The formal Japanese Restaurant Association, established in 1954, specifically acknowledged in its founding charter the contributions of military cooks whose prisoner experiences introduced them to international expectations. This acknowledgement, recognizing value in experiences that traditional Japanese military culture would have considered shameful, demonstrated profound cultural evolution emerging from these unlikely wartime encounters. Tokyo, 1985. Former Seaman Hiroshi Tanaka, now 73, stood beside retired Commander James Wilson, 82, as they cut the ceremonial ribbon opening the Pacific Culinary Institute. 4 decades after their unprecedented encounter aboard USS Saratoga, former captive and captor jointly inaugurated an institution dedicated to culinary exchange between Japanese and American traditions. The moment symbolized a journey from mortal enmity to profound partnership, a transformation. Professor Samuel Harrison's landmark study, Chopsticks and Forks, Culinary Diplomacy in the Pacific War, identified as perhaps the most unlikely and successful reconciliation in modern military history. Historical analysis reveals that simple culinary exchanges between Japanese prisoners and American personnel during 1944-1945 established psychological foundations for post-war cooperation that formal diplomatic initiatives could not achieve. Dr. Meredith Tanaka Williams, granddaughter of Hiroshi Tanaka and daughter of Lieutenant Robert Williams, who witnessed the original Saratoga dinner, documented 312 similar culinary exchanges across Pacific Theater detention facilities in her doctoral research. These meals, she concluded, accomplished what military victory alone could not: recognition of shared humanity that transcended ideological divisions. Statistical evidence supports this conclusion. Among 5,640 Japanese prisoners who participated in cooking programs during detention, 78% reported in 1960s surveys that the experience fundamentally altered their perception of Americans. Comparative analysis with non-participating prisoners showed dramatically different post-war attitudes toward American cultural influences, with participant groups demonstrating 64% higher rates of positive engagement with occupation initiatives. These individual transformations, multiplied across thousands of former prisoners who became community leaders during Reconstruction, influenced Japanese society far beyond their numerical representation. Professor Akira Kurosawa of Tokyo University, whose comprehensive 1978 study analyzed occupation-era cultural integration, identified the prisoner cooking programs as catalytic experiences that accelerated reconciliation by years, possibly decades. His research revealed that communities where returned prisoners had participated in culinary exchanges demonstrated measurably higher rates of cooperative engagement with occupation authorities. The simple recognition of cultural value through food, Kurosawa wrote, created openness to broader engagement that political pronouncements could never achieve. Beyond statistical verification, individual stories illuminate these transformations. In Kyoto, 1953, former Lieutenant Takeshi Ito established Friendship Restaurant, employing both Japanese and American chefs, creating innovative fusion cuisine that blended traditions. When interviewed for Pacific Stars and Stripes, Ito explicitly credited his prisoner experience preparing traditional Japanese meals for American officers. They respected my cultural knowledge when they could have treated me merely as defeated enemy. This taught me that reconciliation comes through mutual respect, not domination. The culinary bridge extended beyond restaurants into broader cultural exchange. Annual culinary competitions established in Osaka in 1957 included categories for cross-cultural innovation, directly inspired by prisoner cooking experiences. The Japan-America Culinary Foundation, established 1962 with funding from both governments, explicitly acknowledged in its charter the wartime origins of culinary exchange. By 1975, formal culinary exchange programs had facilitated training for over 4,000 chefs crossing between Japanese and American traditions, establishing professional networks that transcended lingering wartime animosities. Diplomatic historians increasingly recognize these culinary connections as crucial components of successful occupation and reconciliation. Ambassador William Reischauer, in his definitive 1981 memoir, Tokyo Mission, devoted an entire chapter to diplomatic dining, noting, "The greatest breakthroughs often came not during formal negotiations, but over meals where Japanese hosts could demonstrate their cultural traditions through cuisine, establishing dignity and partnership rather than conqueror-conquered dynamics." This diplomatic approach, recognizing cultural value through food, had direct lineage to the prisoner cooking programs 4 decades earlier. Dr. Elizabeth Chen's comprehensive analysis, From Enemy to Ally, Cultural Pathways to Peace, documented how these culinary exchanges influenced broader reconciliation patterns. When former enemies break bread together, particularly bread prepared according to the defeated party's traditions, psychological barriers dissolve more effectively than through political declarations. The Japanese prisoner cooking programs created templates for dignity-preserving reconciliation that influenced subsequent conflict resolutions worldwide. Modern culinary fusion between Japanese and American traditions, now global phenomena appearing everywhere from Tokyo to New York, London to Sydney, traces direct lineage to these wartime exchanges. Chef Masaharu Morimoto, whose grandfather participated in Pearl Harbor prisoner cooking programs, explicitly referenced this heritage when accepting his 3rd Michelin star in 2003. "My grandfather taught me that food transcends political division. In preparing traditional dishes for former enemies, he discovered greater purpose than military service ever provided, building bridges between cultures that violence had separated." The statistical summary reveals lasting impact. Among former Japanese prisoners who participated in cooking programs, 43% established food-related businesses during Reconstruction, compared to 12% of non-participants. Communities where these businesses operated demonstrated measurably higher rates of positive engagement with American cultural influences during crucial 1945-1955 transition period. These metrics, extensively documented in occupation records, demonstrate how individual transformations influenced broader societal reconciliation through concrete economic and cultural pathways. Perhaps most powerfully, descendants of participants carried forward reconciliation through subsequent generations. The Pacific Culinary Exchange Program, established 1972, has facilitated professional training for over 14,000 chefs between Japan and America, explicitly honoring its origins in prisoner cooking experiences through annual Tanaka Wilson scholarships named for the original Saratoga participants. 2nd and 3rd generation descendants of both Japanese prisoners and American military personnel who experienced these cultural exchanges report significantly higher rates of cross-cultural engagement than demographic peers without this historical connection. As elderly Tanaka and Wilson stood together at the 1985 ribbon-cutting ceremony, their journey from enemy combatants to partners in cultural exchange embodied reconciliation's deepest meaning. "We began as enemies defined by war," Wilson reflected in his remarks, "but discovered common humanity through the simple act of preparing and sharing food. What military power could never accomplish. A well-prepared meal achieved recognition that our differences, however profound, matter less than our shared appreciation for craftsmanship, tradition, and hospitality." Tanaka's response, delivered in carefully practiced English, completed the narrative arc. "When American officers asked me to prepare Japanese cuisine 40 years ago, I thought they merely wanted exotic entertainment. I discovered instead they sought understanding. Through preparing traditional dishes for former enemies, I found dignity when I expected only imprisonment. This institute continues what began in wartime, recognition that even bitter enemies can find common ground when they honor each other's cultural traditions. The transformative journey from deadly Pacific War enmity to productive partnership, bridged through the unlikely pathway of prisoner cooking programs, offers enduring lessons about reconciliation after conflict. When former enemies recognize each other's cultural value, demonstrated tangibly through respect for culinary traditions, foundations emerge for cooperation that political negotiations alone cannot establish. The Japanese prisoners who cooked for American victory celebrations initiated this recognition, creating templates for dignity-preserving peace that continue influencing international relations decades beyond their unexpected wartime encounters.